Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you finished a book and actually remembered what was in it? Not the title, not the cover, the actual ideas inside. For most people, the honest answer is they can't remember. They read the book, they highlighted things, they maybe even told someone about it. And then, 3 weeks later, gone, like it never happened. And here's what makes that painful. There are other people who read the same books you've read, and their lives actually change because of it. They get promotions, they make better decisions, they solve problems faster. They seem to know something that everyone else is still searching for. Same books, completely different results. Why? It's not intelligence, it's not speed, it's not even how much they read. It's how they read. There are 7 specific habits that separate people who grow from reading from people who just collect information they never use. And once you see these habits, you can't unsee them. Today, I'm going to walk you through all 7, starting with the one that makes the smallest difference and building to the habit that completely transforms how your brain processes everything you read. By the end of this video, you won't just read differently, you'll think differently. Let's start. Before we get into the habits, one important thing to understand. Reading and learning are not the same activity. Reading is your eyes moving across words. Learning is your brain building new connections and actually storing them for later use. Most people spend their whole lives doing the first thing and wondering why the second thing never happens. Neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman and cognitive psychologist Robert Bjork have both spent years studying how humans actually retain information. Their findings point to the same conclusion. Retention isn't about reading more, it's about reading in a way that forces your brain to do something with the information. That's exactly what these 7 habits do. Habit number 7. People who grow from reading never open a book without a question in their mind. Not a vague sense of curiosity, a specific question. Something like, why do some people handle pressure better than others? How do successful companies make decisions? What do I actually believe about money? And here's why this changes everything. Your brain is not a camera. It doesn't record everything equally. It filters. It pays close attention to things that feel relevant and quietly ignores things that don't. When you read without a question, your brain has no filter. Everything feels equally important, which means nothing gets prioritized, which means almost nothing sticks. But when you read with a question, your brain becomes a search engine. It hunts for answers. It flags relevant passages. It connects new information to things you already know. That process is called active encoding, and according to research from Princeton University, active encoding increases retention by up to 50% compared to passive reading. Before you open your next book, write one question at the top of a blank page, one thing you actually want to know. Then read to answer it. Habit number 6, and this one might be the most liberating thing I tell you today. People who grow from reading quit books all the time, halfway through, sometimes after 10 pages, without guilt, without apology. I know that feels wrong. We were all taught to finish what we start, to push through, to complete it. But here's what that belief costs you. Every hour you spend forcing yourself through a book that isn't serving you is an hour you could have spent in a book that changes your life. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the author of The Black Swan, famously called his unfinished books his most valuable collection. The books he stopped reading taught him what he didn't need. The ones he couldn't put down taught him everything else. Reader and author Ryan Holiday calls this the 10-page rule. Give every book 10 pages. If it hasn't earned your attention by then, close it and move on. No guilt, no drama. The people who grow the most from reading treat books like conversations. If the conversation isn't useful, they politely excuse themselves and find one that is. Habit number 5. In a world obsessed with speed reading and reading a book a week and consuming as much as possible, the people who actually retain and apply what they read do something that looks almost backwards. They slow down, deliberately. Not because they're slow readers, because they understand something important. Speed and comprehension are opposites. When you race through a book, your eyes move, your brain doesn't. You finish the page, you remember almost nothing from it. But when you slow down, when you pause after a paragraph that matters and actually sit with it, something different happens. Your brain begins to process. It asks, what does this remind me of? Where have I seen this before? How does this apply to my life? That processing is called elaborative interrogation. Cognitive scientists at the University of Wisconsin found it to be one of the most effective learning strategies available to the human brain. It's not complicated, it just requires slowing down enough to actually think. Here's a practical way to do this. When you hit a sentence that feels important, stop. Don't highlight it yet. Just close your eyes for 10 seconds and ask yourself what it means to you specifically. Then keep reading. That 10-second pause is worth more than 10 pages read at speed. Habit number 4. Most people who take reading notes make one critical mistake. They copy. They find a sentence they like and they write it word for word, or they highlight it and call that a note, and then they never look at it again. And even if they do, it doesn't stick, because copying is not thinking. Here's what people who grow from reading do instead. They close the book, or they look away from the page and they write the idea in their own words. Not the author's phrasing, their phrasing. This is called the generation effect, and it's one of the most replicated findings in all of memory science. When your brain has to reconstruct an idea in its own language, it builds a neural pathway to that idea. It becomes yours. Psychologists Roediger and Karpicke published landmark research in 2006 showing that students who rewrote concepts in their own words retained 50% more information 1 week later than students who reread the same material. The practical habit is simple. After every chapter, just one paragraph, in your own words. What did I just learn? What does it mean? Why does it matter? That's it. That single paragraph is worth more than a page of copied highlights. We're now into the top 3. These are the habits almost nobody talks about. They're not in most reading guides, they're not in productivity videos, but they are the ones that create the biggest gap between people who read and people who actually grow. Stay with me.
Habit number 3. People who grow from reading never treat a book as an island. They treat every book as a conversation in a much longer conversation that started long before they arrived. Here's what I mean. When someone who grows from reading finishes a book about decision-making, they don't just file it away. They immediately ask, where have I seen this idea before? What did that book on psychology say about this? How does this connect to what I read about history last year? This habit has a name in neuroscience. It's called interleaving, and it's one of the most powerful ways the human brain builds deep, lasting knowledge. When two ideas from different sources connect inside your brain, the memory of both becomes stronger. Not just one, both. It's as if your brain says, if this idea is showing up in multiple places, it must be important. Let me hold on to it more tightly. Charlie Munger, the legendary investor and partner of Warren Buffett, built his entire mental framework this way. He called it a latticework of mental models. Ideas from physics, psychology, history, and biology, all connected into one unified way of seeing the world. He didn't just read broadly, he actively looked for the threads connecting everything he read. And he credited that habit with most of his ability to make great decisions. After your next book, ask yourself one question. Where else have I seen this idea? That question alone starts building the latticework. Habit number 2. And this one goes against almost everything our culture tells us about reading. People who grow from books don't always read new ones. They go back. They reread. They review their notes. They return to chapters that mattered. Not because they forgot, because they know something about memory that most people don't. The brain does not store memories permanently the first time it encounters something. Memory is a biological process.
and like any biological process, it needs to be repeated to become strong. There's a concept called spaced repetition. It was first described by psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus in the 1880s. He discovered what he called the forgetting curve, the rate at which the brain naturally discards information it hasn't revisited. Within 24 hours of reading something, you forget approximately 40% of it. Within a week, up to 70%. But every time you revisit the material, the forgetting curve resets, and the memory becomes harder to erase. This is why the people who seem to know everything aren't necessarily reading more, they're revisiting more. A simple version of this habit is every Sunday spend 15 minutes reviewing your notes from that week's reading, not rereading the whole book, just your notes, your own words, your own questions. 15 minutes once a week, and the things you read stop disappearing. And now, habit number 1. The habit that makes every other habit on this list actually matter. The one thing that separates the people whose lives genuinely change from reading from the people who simply have a longer list of books they've finished. They act immediately, while the idea is still alive in their mind. Here's what most people do after a great book. They close it, they feel inspired, they think, I should really apply this. And then life happens, and the inspiration quietly fades, and 6 months later they're recommending the book to someone but couldn't tell you a single thing they changed because of it. People who grow from reading do something different. While they're still reading, sometimes mid-chapter, they stop and do something with what they just learned. They send the email they'd been avoiding. They write down the decision they'd been delaying. They have the conversation they kept postponing. They restructure the thing that the book just helped them see clearly. They don't wait for the perfect moment. They act in the imperfect present moment. Because here's the truth about reading that nobody puts on the back cover of any book. Information without action is just entertainment. You can read every self-improvement book ever written. You can highlight every insight. You can fill 10 notebooks with brilliant quotes. And if you never do anything differently, nothing changes. The books aren't the magic. You are the magic. The book just shows you where to look. The people who grow from reading aren't smarter than you. They're not faster than you. They just made one decision that changed their relationship with books forever. They decided that every book they read would leave a mark on how they live, not just how they think, how they live. And that decision, that single shift in intention, is what turns reading from a hobby into the most powerful personal development tool available to any human being on Earth. Let's bring it all together. 7. Read with a specific question. Give your brain a filter, not just a topic. 6. Quit books without guilt. Your time is too valuable for the wrong conversation. 5. Slow down on purpose. 10 seconds of thinking beats 10 pages of rushing. 4. Take notes in your own words. Copying is not learning. Reconstructing is. 3. Connect books to each other. Build the lattice work. Look for the threads. 2. Revisit what you've read. Memory needs repetition to survive. 1. Act before the inspiration fades. Information without action is just entertainment. You don't need to do all 7 tomorrow. Pick one. The one that felt most honest when you heard it. The one where some part of you quietly thought, that's exactly what I haven't been doing. Start there. 1 book, 1 habit, 1 week. And then notice what's different. Because the reader who grows isn't the one who reads the most. It's the one who reads like every page is a conversation they're determined to finish. If someone you know keeps buying books but feels like they're not going anywhere, send them this. It might be exactly what they needed to hear.